How to be a good defensive player in chess? Well, these are the 9 resources that you guys have to know by heart. So we're going to go one by one. I'm going to give you examples, and hopefully by the end, you're going to have a better idea of what to look for when you're being attacked. Now, first item on our list seems obvious, but I know that I'm going to show you 2 examples, and I'm pretty sure that you're going to miss at least one of them. Guys, we need to close the attacking lines that our opponents are using to attack us. Now, before we go over this example, let me show you another one that I use a lot with my students when we're learning about attacking the king. And in this position, the white pieces simply took on g6, and I often ask my students, okay, what would you do in this position as black? And of course, the natural move, the impulse is to simply take back. But only like 2 or 3 who already went with me over these lessons of how to defend, they choose the right move. Now, the right move here is pawn to h5. Now, let me explain to you the foundation that they get. How did they understand this is the move? Well, going from this example, we need to understand that in this case, rooks are only powerful is if they have either the entire file to put pressure on, or if they have a weak end or a weak target to put pressure on, like this pawn. Now, when we talk about this position, the first thing that we talk about is that the moment we advance the pawn, now we limit that line of attacking. So it goes, instead of going from g1 to g7, it goes up to g6 only. And believe it or not, it's a significant improvement for black. But more importantly, this is not a weak end anymore. It is a pawn that is defended by another pawn. Now, they only got a powerful diagonal, but that in itself, it's not enough. Typically, you need different factors to have a successful attack, like more attackers than defenders. And in this case, the bishop only is not going to do much. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you how Lasker turned this game around. But before going back here, and sorry for the back and forth, but going back here, this rook is powerful if it controls the entire file. The same thing for this one, or if it has a target. The moment we did h5, now this one is closed, and this one is limited by so many squares defended by the rook. I'm not saying black is winning, but it's way better than if they had just taken here, okay? Now, second resource, guys, is repairing weaknesses. We've said it too many times. Every time we move a pawn in chess, weaknesses are created, and that's the case when we push the g2 pawn. Now, what is the main thing? Well, the light squares, of course, around the king. So since we cannot take or put the pawns back, we need to mechanically bring pieces to help us defend those squares. Of course, this is a fianchetto. We've had so many lessons on this. We need our bishop for this to not be so weak. And that's exactly what they did in this game. It seems obvious, but many people don't realize that all they need to do is bishop d5, bishop g2. And in this case, it's pretty easy, but sometimes even if it's not, the fact that you know what you're looking for is going to help you a lot. So in this game, bishop d5, hitting that rook, bishop f5 was played, queen e3, rook d8, and after bishop g2, queen g4, the white pieces are way, way better. Now, knight d2 was played, queen g6, knight f3. Notice how this knight comes quickly from being passive to helping the king side. Our king side was so weak, and in a matter of a few moves, it became very, very strong. So knight f3, queen g5, and this is something also we're going to talk more later, but if I'm being attacked, I need to eliminate pieces, guys. So after queen g5, it's hard to say black pieces have a strong attack on my king. So there you have it. And guys, as we go through these examples, let me know in the comments the ones that you are missing, the ones that you're getting easily, because it's going to help me know what we need to reinforce in future lessons. This next item or resource is pretty straightforward, but still there are a couple things that I need you always to keep in mind. Number one, when I'm being attacked, I want to trade pieces, right? And if possible, get to that endgame, or at least get out of this crazy pressure on my king. But 2 things. Number one, I want to make sure that I don't trade my most useful pieces, my best pieces, for their passive pieces. So it's not trading for the sake of trading, and we've talked about this before. Second, I need to make sure that my opponent to the best of my possibilities, I want to make sure my opponent doesn't get any initiative out of it. Sometimes you cannot do anything about it, but I need to be paying attention to it. Now, here, guys, the white pieces simply found a great move, queen a5. And it's great because I'm offering to just trade that queen. Without the queen, I don't feel so bad about them having these files and the knight jumping over and attacking the king. Now, of course, if they take, not only do we trade, but they lose the pawn because we got simple tactic, check, king needs to move, and then I get a fork or another fork, and I'm gonna get that weak pawn on d6. So there you have it. Trade pieces is another resource simply to get out of this uncomfortable situation, but also to get to an endgame where I might have better chances. This next one might seem like a little bit of the same thing, but it's important that we address it individually anyways. Sometimes it's not like we have a lot of pieces attacking our king, but our opponent has a very powerful piece on the board, right? It could be a knight in the outpost. It could be, like in this case, a powerful bishop, right? So we gotta be thinking, guys, sometimes even proactively, that we need to get rid of that piece. In this position, if you want, pause the video, see if you can think of the next move for black. But the move is knight d7, trying to eliminate that bishop. Without that bishop, then they're left with another bishop that is not so good, a knight that is pretty much controlled by my pawns. So that's why it makes so much sense to temporarily put my knight back to d7 and then bishop f6, eliminating that bishop. So in this game, they played g4 to continue to expand on the king side, a4, knight takes, bishop a6, and you can see how quickly they got initiative. So without that bishop, not only am I better when it comes to the king side safety, but also it allows me to create counterplay on the queen side, because now this diagonal is going to allow me to even create trouble. So rook takes, knight c5, queen b6. You see already I'm getting on that diagonal. Imagine the powerful bishop still on d4, right? And just to show you a little bit more, they traded and they went into this endgame. If I activate the engine, it's giving negative 0.50 something for black. So black is slightly better in this position. Knight better than the bishop. King is not so safe. There's still queen and rook on the board. So there you have it, guys. Very important that we pay attention to our opponent's best pieces. Now, as far as this subject goes, or this resource, we can also see it in openings like the French defense. French defense, we strike the center, but then in this variation where they advance, we get a locked center. Immediately, this bishop for me doesn't look good. The light square bishop for white becomes a monster. And if you remember our lesson on the Greek gift, you know that that bishop combined with the pawn on e5, they are pretty aggressive. So what do they do many times? They play b6 with the idea to play bishop a6 and remove that powerful piece from our opponent. So something else to keep in mind. Now, relieving pressure, is this a little bit of the same thing with different words? Maybe, but it doesn't hurt to give you more examples, guys. What does that mean? Well, in this case, and we see it a lot when we're being pinned. We know, I remember when I was in Cuba, there was this guy who used to say, of course, joking, he would say, oh, it's always ugly to see a man being pinned, right? So we'd always remember him, we'd never forget that. So whenever you're being pinned, guys, maybe it's not a big deal right now, but in a few moves when they add more pressure, it's going to become a problem. So if we see this situation, you're being pinned, you're being restrained in any way, we gotta think of getting rid of it right away. Don't wait 5 moves later when more things came up, right? So in this case, you're gonna see Ben Larsen playing Spassky. He finds a pretty nice resource, which is knight e8. I'm not pinned anymore. If they take me, I take them. So queen e7 was played, queen takes, bishop takes, rook g8. And again, my position is way better than it was before. On the same topic, you see here another great game played by Najdorf and Averbach. And now I just remembered Averbach passed away, I think last year, recently. But anyways, in this position, very annoying, this pin on the knight. And Averbach simply played knight a5. Get rid of that tension with that, my position is going to feel way better. After that, we find a way to remove that knight. It's not e5, it's not a weak square. So I'm not going to wait until they bring more pieces, they attack my king. No. Let's get rid of everything, and my position is going to improve a lot. So in this game, they took, then queen a4. Notice how they keep putting pressure on my pawns, and a little bit counterintuitive, but here, Averbach decided to just play pawn to d6. Yes, occupy that square if you like. If you do, I'm going to be the one pinning you. So always looking for that opportunity to restrain your opponent. So knight d3 was played, and if I show you the evaluation is giving 0.79 for the black pieces. This next item, confuse your opponent's pieces, is a little bit confusing, and this one, I gotta say, typically takes us many more examples and more talking about it, but at the same time, I think at this point in the course, guys, lesson 200 and something, you have a very good idea of what this is about. So basically, in this game, Reshevsky is playing Adams, and his idea is to put pressure, attack his opponent's pieces. That way, they cannot get coordinated. So basically, it goes down to this. Make it difficult for your opponent's pieces to be coordinated and create an attack, right? So just to show you a few moves, he took on d4, and then he doesn't like the rook on this file. He doesn't like the bishop in the center like that. He doesn't like, of course, this knight in the center. So first move he plays from this moment on is a6, controlling that knight, and after that, knight c5. I start hitting that bishop, then I hit the rook, and you can see how it's hard to tell these pieces are working toward getting more coordinated. So rook d8, now I'm pinning the knight, so it's constantly creating threats so that they cannot get organized. Queen c2, g6, b4, e5, and all of a sudden white's position went from being pretty comfortable to not so clear anymore, right? So they took, we take back, they get doubled isolated pawns, isolated pawn, and we got a pass pawn. Yes, also isolated, but it is a pass pawn, and my bishop is coming to f5 even. So this is something to keep in mind. If you have that opportunity, use it to disrupt your opponent's harmony in their pieces. If not, try to create such opportunities. Next position, of course, I had to show you a King's Indian defense game. And this one has to do with redeployment, remaneuvering your pieces, right? And I've gotten this idea many times in my game. So the main thing is our knight, and we know if you've been with me from the beginning when we talked about the King's Indian defense, many times this knight goes to h5, e8, d7, so that we can target the pawn in front of our most forward pawn, right? So we play f5, and for that, we need the knight out. Well, now it is time to bring that knight to a more useful square. So knight f6 was played, bishop takes, pawn takes, and then finally, the powerful move to find is knight e8. From here, I'm going to d6, blocking this pawn from moving forward and putting more pressure on their own pawns. Also, sometimes we bring it to g7, but the point is, on f6, it is not as effective. So we need to think, okay, my position is not so nice. Can I redeploy, remaneuver my pieces to improve my position, right? So in this case, they're doing the same thing. Knight goes to d6, and after that, I just need to improve my bishop, see if I'm going to use the f file or if I'm going to organize an attack on their king. Now, what is this breaking the attacking front? Well, the attacking front, guys, is when you're being attacked sometimes with pawns. So we know about these pawn storms. Like in this case, it's happening on the queen side. We've talked about it so many times. We've seen it on the king side. But in this case, this is a closed Sicilian. And if you play the closed Sicilian with white or black guys, you have to review the games of Boris Spassky. Now, here as the black pieces, Larsen plays a5. And the idea is to just play before, right? They're coming with their attacking front with their pawns to create weaknesses, gain more space. White pieces are going to be uncomfortable. Now, of course, Spassky is very familiar with these positions, and he played the powerful pawn a4. So this is the way to break down, to counterattack that attacking front. The idea, simple. If they just take on a4, well, there's no attack in front anymore. This is pretty weakened right now. And then we continue with the king side. And if they push, now we go knight b5. Don't forget, the moment they pushed the a pawn, b5 is going to become weaker. So the moment we place the knight there, forget about this attack that they had on the queen side. So automatically the position improves a lot for white. And just to show you a few more moves, they continued with c4, just trying to completely block that queen side attack. And then it's going to be very nice to attack on the king side without having to worry about any pressure on the queen side. Of course, this is something that you're familiar with from our King's Indian lessons, but here you see it in a different fashion. Again, I see this intimidating attack with the pawns. How can I break it down? How can I stop it? And many times we see people just moving the pieces away so that they don't come so strongly with tempos. But in this case, this is just genius. Just a4, knight b5, c4, end of story. Now, finally, when it comes to the last item, seizing the center, we have talked so much about this, right? We played these hyper modern openings, the Pierce defense, King's Indian defense. So we're always looking for that idea to strike the center. However, let me give you a more specific example. Like here you see the typical, right? We develop the king side, we let them have a beautiful center, and then we strike it. So sort of like what we saw before with the attacking front, right? Now d5 already making concessions, then castle, bishop d3, e6, pawn takes, and pawn takes. So basically, this last item is about not forgetting, guys, that in order to not be attacked so heavily, we need to claim that center. Like in this case, many of my students, when I ask them to evaluate the position, give me the candidate moves, they talk about a6, knight d7, bishop g4, but rarely do I get knight h5. And knight h5 makes a lot of sense because I'm trying to play f5. Like if they castle and then f5, notice how this pawn, first of all, is going to stop him from playing f5. This is a pretty easy attacking plan for white, and once they engage in it, it's hard for us to defend. So we anticipate that. Also, g4 is in the air, and the bishop is controlling it, but now we have the pawn as well. And lastly, we're controlling e4. So that's the point of controlling the center. We have two powerful squares that belong to us. Our opponent's pieces are going to have a difficult time maneuvering in the center. And of course, now we fight for the e file and so on. But it's way easier when you control the center. So guys, I know many of these things seem basic and maybe you already knew them, but this is the most basic we should know to call ourselves good defensive players. Of course, as we continue through lessons 200s, we're going to talk more about how to defend, but I think this is a pretty good place to start. With that said, I will see you guys in our next lesson.